I stared at the cell culture through my microscope, the familiar blue glow of the LED display casting shadows across my face. The lab had emptied hours ago, leaving just me and my thoughts in the sterile silence of Moreno Valley Institute. Another breakthrough, Dr. Brown? Tom, the night janitor, poked his head through the door. Just reviewing today's samples. I straightened my back, feeling the strain of another 14-hour day. My brunette hair had escaped its neat bun, falling in wisps around my face. I caught my reflection in the darkened window, green eyes tired but still determined. The cells were displaying unusual patterns, something I hadn't seen in my 15 years of research. The data could revolutionize our understanding of cellular regeneration. But success felt hollow in the empty lab, with no one to share it with. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over Sarah's number. 3 years since she walked away, claiming I loved my research more than her. Maybe she was right. I deleted her contact for the 100th time. Dr. Brown? Department Head Morrison's voice startled me. I hadn't heard him come in. Still here at midnight? Just finishing up, James. I gestured at the microscope. The results are promising. He nodded, sliding a folder across my desk. That's why I'm assigning you a research assistant. You need support for this project. I work better alone. The words came out sharper than intended. The board insists. He tapped the folder. She starts Monday, top of her class, specialized in cellular imaging. Give her a chance. I flipped through the file after he left. The candidate's credentials were impressive: degrees from top universities, published papers, advanced microscopy expertise. But something else caught my eye, a note about her photography background. Unusual for a scientist. The lab felt different that night, less lonely somehow. Maybe change wouldn't be so bad. I packed my bag, making mental notes about Monday's orientation. The weight of my camera bumped against my hip as I walked to my car, my own escape from endless hours of research. The drive home through Moreno Valley was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows. I needed new equipment for my weekend photography sessions. That vintage camera shop on Main Street had caught my eye. Perhaps I'd stop by tomorrow. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured a glass of wine. The city lights twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, reminding me of cell clusters under the microscope. Science and solitude had been my companions for so long. But tomorrow was Saturday, and for once, I had plans beyond the lab. Tom's words echoed in my mind. Another breakthrough. If only he knew how much I needed one, not in my research, but in my life. I set my alarm for the morning, something I rarely did on weekends. That camera shop opened at 10. For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with cellular biology. Little did I know, that flutter was the first sign of the biggest breakthrough of all. Main Street had that sleepy Saturday morning feel as I pushed open the door to Time Captured, the vintage camera shop I'd been eyeing for weeks. Brass bells chimed overhead, and the scent of old leather and metal filled my nose. Display cases lined the walls, each housing carefully curated pieces of photographic history. My fingers traced the glass, searching for something to fill the creative void in my life. That's when I saw it. A pristine Rolleiflex 28 Fahrenheits, its twin lenses gleaming under soft gallery lights. As I reached for the display case handle, another hand appeared beside mine. The 2.8 Fahrenheits is a masterpiece. The voice was warm, confident. I turned to find myself staring into striking blue eyes. The woman was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with golden hair falling in casual waves past her shoulders. Her smile lit up her entire face. "You know vintage cameras?" I asked, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the unexpected flutter in my chest. "I should hope so." She laughed, extending her hand. "Stephanie Jenkins, this is my shop." We spent the next hour discussing shutter speeds and focal lengths. Stephanie knew every camera in her store intimately, speaking about them with the same passion I reserved for cell biology. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself sharing stories about my own photography adventures. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," Stephanie said, glancing at her watch. "Their espresso is almost as vintage as these cameras. Join me?" The cafe was a cozy spot with exposed brick walls and local art. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from photography to our careers, our lives in Moreno Valley, our shared love of capturing life's quieter moments. "So, Dr. Brown?" Stephanie teased. What brings a cellular biologist to my humble camera shop? Aaron, please. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. Sometimes I need to see the world through a different lens. The lab can be isolating. Science and art aren't so different, she mused. Both require patience, precision, and the ability to see what others might miss. The morning stretched into afternoon. Stephanie shared her journey from photography student to shop owner, her eyes sparkling with pride as she described restoring vintage cameras. I found myself opening up about my research, surprised by her genuine interest and insightful questions. I should get back to the shop, she said eventually, though she made no move to leave. But I'd love to see your work sometime. We exchanged numbers, and I tried to ignore how my hand trembled slightly as I entered her contact information. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant haze, my thoughts repeatedly drifting to blue eyes and shared laughter. That evening, as I reviewed my research notes for Monday, I couldn't focus. The new research assistant's file sat unopened on my desk, but my mind kept wandering to the vintage camera shop and its enchanting owner. I pulled out my old film camera, inspired to shoot again after our conversation. The city looked different through the viewfinder that night, less lonely, more full of possibility. Each frame I captured seemed to hold a hint of something new beginning. Little did I know, Monday morning would bring its own surprise, one that would completely blur the lines between my carefully separated worlds. Monday morning hit differently. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying Saturday's chance encounter at the camera shop. The lab felt sterile and predictable as I prepared for the new research assistant's arrival. Dr. Brown? Morrison's voice carried through the doorway. Your new assistant is here. I turned around, and my coffee mug nearly slipped from my fingers. Standing there in a crisp lab coat was Stephanie Jenkins, her blonde hair now pulled back in a professional bun, but those blue eyes unmistakable. Stephanie will be joining your team, Morrison continued, oblivious to my shock. She comes highly recommended from Berkeley. We maintained composure through the introductions, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air. Once Morrison left, Stephanie broke into a small smile. Surprise, she whispered. I probably should have mentioned this on Saturday. You knew? I tried to keep my voice steady, professional. Not until I got home and reviewed my placement details. She fidgeted with her ID badge. I almost called, but I thought it might be better to explain in person. The morning passed in a blur of safety protocols and equipment orientation. I found myself hyper-aware of every movement, every accidental brush of hands as we calibrated microscopes. Her expertise was evident. She handled the equipment with the same careful precision I'd seen her use with vintage cameras. Your research is fascinating, Stephanie said as we reviewed cell cultures. The way you're approaching cellular regeneration, it's like photography in reverse, capturing life as it creates itself. The afternoon stretched into evening, other researchers slowly filtering out. We stayed, absorbed in work and careful conversation, dancing around the elephant in the room. We should discuss this, I finally said, looking up from the microscope. The lab was empty except for us, the evening sun casting long shadows through the windows. The fact that I'm your assistant now, or the fact that I haven't stopped thinking about Saturday. Stephanie's directness caught me off guard. Both. I moved to the window, needing space to think. This complicates things. Does it have to? She joined me, our reflections overlapping in the glass. We're both professionals. We can handle this. The setting sun painted her face in soft oranges and pinks. In that moment, she looked like one of those perfectly composed photographs we'd discussed in her shop. I don't mix personal and professional life, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Maybe it's time for a new approach. She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. Sometimes the best discoveries happen when we break our own rules. The air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. We were standing too close now, the line between supervisor and supervised dangerously thin. Stephanie. It came out as barely a whisper. She leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Her lips met mine with gentle certainty, a kiss that tasted of coffee and possibility. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this, the soft press of her mouth, the slight tremble of her hand against my cheek. We broke apart at the sound of the janitor's cart in the hallway. Reality crashed back in, and I stepped away, straightening my lab coat with shaking hands. We should call it a day, I managed, gathering my things. Erin. She caught my wrist gently. We can't pretend this isn't happening. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw both the passionate artist from Saturday and the brilliant scientist from today. The combination was intoxicating and terrifying. One step at a time, I said finally. We need to figure this out. She nodded, understanding the complexities ahead. As we left the lab separately that evening, I realized there was no going back. Like a photograph emerging in developer fluid, something was taking shape between us, something that would change everything. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both dangerous and delicious. Our lunches in the Institute's courtyard became an unspoken ritual, away from the fluorescent lights and prying eyes of the lab. Your cell cultures are showing remarkable progress, Stephanie said one afternoon, unwrapping her sandwich. The autumn sun caught her hair, turning it to spun gold. The regeneration rates are unprecedented. The board's impressed. I picked at my salad, more interested in watching her hands gesturing animatedly as she talked. They're talking about additional funding. We kept our professional distance in the lab, but these lunch hours were different. Here, under the canopy of maple trees, we could just be Erin and Stephanie. The conversation flowed between science and art, work and life, past and future. I'm hosting a gallery showing next month, she mentioned casually. Some of my vintage camera work. Would you come? Our fingers brushed as she handed me an invitation. The touch sent electricity through my arm, reminding me of that kiss in the lab we hadn't discussed since. Weekends became our sanctuary. We started with photo walks through Moreno Valley Park, capturing the changing seasons through our respective lenses. Stephanie taught me to use the Rolleiflex, her hands guiding mine on the focus knob, her breath warm against my neck. You have a natural eye, she said, reviewing my shots. We sat close on a park bench, shoulders touching. You see patterns others miss. Years of microscope work, I joked, but my voice caught as she tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The invitation to dinner at my apartment happened naturally, like everything else between us. I spent hours preparing, channeling my laboratory precision into cooking. The wine was breathing, jazz playing softly when she arrived. Something smells amazing. Stephanie handed me a bottle of wine, then paused. You look beautiful. Her eyes traced my figure, no lab coat between us tonight. Dinner was a dance of meaningful glances and careful conversations. We shared stories about our first cameras, our worst dates, our biggest dreams. The wine loosened our tongues, but we both knew this wasn't about alcohol. Tell me about your research before Moreno Valley, she said, curled up on my couch. The city lights twinkled behind her like stars. I told her about my years of dedication, the lonely nights, the breakthroughs and setbacks. She listened with those intense blue eyes, asking questions that showed she understood not just the science, but the passion behind it. You never gave up, she mused, moving closer. That's what I admire about you. What about you? I turned to face her. Running a business, pursuing a PhD, it couldn't have been easy. Worth every challenge. Her hand found mine in the dim light. Some things are worth risking everything for. The air between us crackled with possibility. We'd been dancing around this moment for weeks, professional boundaries becoming increasingly blurred. Her thumb traced patterns on my palm, each touch a question. Erin, she whispered, and my name on her lips sounded like a prayer. I leaned in first this time, closing the distance between us. The kiss was different from our first, slower, deeper, full of weeks of wanting. Her hands tangled in my hair as mine found her waist. We broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching. The line we'd been carefully walking had just been crossed, and we both knew it. Tomorrow would bring complications, questions, consequences. But tonight, in the soft glow of city lights, none of that mattered. Stay, I whispered against her lips. She answered with another kiss, and I knew we were both falling, faster and deeper than either of us had planned. Like a perfectly timed photograph. Some moments you just have to capture when they come. The envelope sat on my desk like a ticking bomb. Heavy cream paper, gold embossing, my name written in elegant calligraphy. Sarah's handwriting hadn't changed. I traced the letters, remembering how she used to leave me little notes in the lab. Bad news? Stephanie's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway, lab coat pristine, concern written across her features. Sarah's getting married? The words felt strange in my mouth. My ex, she wants me to come. Stephanie crossed the room, closing the door behind her. Her hand rested on my shoulder, warm and steady. When? Next month. I handed her the invitation. +1? She read it carefully, her free hand still on my shoulder. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken thoughts. 3 years had passed since Sarah left, claiming I'd never make time for a real relationship. Now here was Stephanie, somehow fitting perfectly into both my worlds. I'll go with you, she said finally. If you want. I looked up at her, surprised. You'd do that? Of course. She squeezed my shoulder gently. Besides, I have the perfect vintage camera for a wedding. That weekend, we went dress shopping. The boutique was quiet, soft music playing as we browsed the racks. Stephanie pulled out a midnight blue dress, holding it up to me. This one. Her eyes sparkled. It matches your lab coat. Very funny. But I took it to the fitting room anyway. The dress fit perfectly, hugging curves usually hidden under scientific equipment. When I stepped out, Stephanie's expression made my breath catch. She crossed the small space between us, fingers trailing along the silk at my waist. You look stunning. Her voice was low, intimate. The fitting room mirror reflected us both, her golden hair contrasting with my dark dress, her hands on my waist, my pulse visible at my throat. The boutique seemed to fade away, leaving just us and this moment. Stephanie. I turned to face her, the dress rustling softly. She kissed me then, gentle but insistent, backing me against the fitting room wall. My hands found her hair, pulling her closer. We broke apart at the sound of approaching footsteps, both breathing heavily. I'll take the dress, I called out to the hovering saleswoman, not taking my eyes off Stephanie. That evening, we had dinner at her apartment above the camera shop. Vintage photographs lined the walls, telling stories of moments frozen in time. The wedding invitation lay between us on the table, a bridge or a barrier. Tell me about her, Stephanie said softly, pouring more wine. Sarah? I stared into my glass. She was my first serious relationship after graduate school. We worked together at Berkeley. What happened? Science won. I smiled sadly. At least that's what she said. I was always in the lab, always chasing the next breakthrough. Stephanie's hand found mine across the table. And now? Now I have someone who understands both sides of me. The words came easily, surprising us both. She stood, pulling me up with her. Music drifted up from the shop below, something slow and sweet. We swayed together in her kitchen, my head on her shoulder, her arms around my waist. We should practice, she murmured. For the wedding. I lifted my head, meeting her gaze. Just for the wedding? Her answer was a kiss, soft and sure, tasting of wine and promises. The wedding invitation lay forgotten on the table as we danced in the growing darkness, both knowing this was more than practice, more than +1. Sarah's elegant handwriting had once meant everything to me. Now it was just ink on paper. While Stephanie's touch wrote new stories on my skin, the past was developing into something unexpected, like a photograph slowly revealing its true image. The wedding venue was a converted Victorian mansion, all sweeping staircases and crystal chandeliers. I gripped Stephanie's hand as we walked in, her midnight blue dress matching mine. The morning light filtered through stained glass, painting rainbow patterns across the marble floor. Erin! Sarah's voice carried across the foyer. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, brown hair swept up elegantly. You came! Congratulations. I managed a genuine smile, surprised by how little it hurt. Sarah, this is Stephanie. Your +1? Sarah's eyes sparkled knowingly. Before either of us could respond, a younger woman appeared at Sarah's side. Tessa, my sister and maid of honor, Sarah introduced. Tessa, this is Erin, my old friend from Berkeley. Tessa's presence was magnetic. She had Sarah's features but sharper, more defined. Her green eyes lingered on Stephanie longer than necessary, and something twisted in my chest. Sarah's told me all about you, Tessa said, her voice warm. The brilliant scientist who got away. The ceremony passed in a blur of flowers and vows. I watched my ex-girlfriend marry someone else, while my current, whatever we were, sat beside me. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. At the reception, Stephanie excused herself to the bathroom, leaving me at our table. Tessa immediately took the empty seat. Dance with me? She held out her hand. Sarah says you're quite good. I hesitated, but social obligations won out. As we moved across the dance floor, I couldn't help but notice how gracefully she led. So, you and Stephanie? Tessa's question was casual, but her eyes were intense. How long? It's complicated. I watched over her shoulder as Stephanie returned, saw her expression fall slightly at the sight of us dancing. Isn't it always? Tessa moved closer than strictly necessary. You know, I always had a crush on you when Sarah brought you home for holidays. Before I could respond, Stephanie appeared beside us. Mind if I cut in? The tension on the dance floor was palpable as Tessa stepped back with a knowing smile. Stephanie's arms around me felt like coming home. You looked cozy, she muttered, leading me into a slow turn. Jealous? I teased, but her expression remained serious. Should I be? We moved to the garden for privacy. Fairy lights twinkling in the growing dusk. The music drifted out through open windows, creating a dreamy atmosphere. Stephanie. I took her hands in mine. Tessa could be a mirror image of Sarah, and it wouldn't matter. I'm here with you. She studied our intertwined fingers. I saw the way she looked at you, the way you danced together. Look at me. I waited until she met my eyes. The past is the past. Sarah, Tessa, Berkeley, it's all just prologue. You're my story now. The garden was secluded, hidden from the reception's bright lights. When I kissed her, she tasted of champagne and certainty. Her hands cupped my face as mine found her waist, pulling her closer. Get a room, you two. Tessa's amused voice broke the moment. She stood in the garden doorway, silhouetted against the party lights. Tessa. I started, but she held up a hand. Don't apologize, I get it now. Her smile was genuine. Some chemistry can't be denied, even a scientist should know that. She disappeared back into the reception, leaving us alone in the garden. Stephanie buried her face in my neck, laughing softly. I feel ridiculous now, she murmured. Don't. I held her closer. Being jealous means you care. The party continued inside, but we stayed in the garden, swaying to distant music. Sarah's wedding had brought me full circle, showing me exactly where I belonged. Later, watching Stephanie drive us home, I realized something. Sometimes you have to return to the past to find your future. And sometimes your future is sitting right beside you, singing along to the radio with wind-blown hair and a smile that outshines any wedding day. Office gossip spreads faster than cell cultures. The whispers started small, lingering glances in the lab, shared lunches that stretched too long, the way we seemed to communicate without words over microscopes. Dr. Brown? Dr. Morrison caught me after a department meeting. A word about the research assistant situation? My stomach tightened. I followed him into his office, where he closed the door with deliberate slowness. The board is pleased with your progress, he began, shuffling papers on his desk. Ms. Jenkins has proven to be an exceptional addition to the team. I waited for the other shoe to drop. It came quickly. However, there are concerns about professional boundaries. He looked uncomfortable. Several staff members have noticed a certain closeness. Our work requires close collaboration, I said carefully. The cellular imaging techniques are complex. Of course. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. Just remember, workplace relationships can complicate grant applications. The board is conservative about these things. The warning was clear. Walking back to the lab, I caught snippets of conversation that stopped when I passed. Stephanie was bent over a microscope, her lab coat pristine, hair neatly pulled back. Morrison spoke to you? She asked without looking up. News traveled fast. We need to be more careful. I kept my voice professional, aware of others nearby. That evening, after everyone left, we finally talked. The lab felt different at night, more intimate despite the harsh fluorescent lights. I hate sneaking around, Stephanie said, perched on a lab stool. Like we're doing something wrong. The department has strict policies about supervisor-subordinate relationships. I paced the small space. They could reassign you to another project. Or we could go public. She caught my hand as I passed. Request a different reporting structure. And risk both our careers? The words came out harsher than intended. Is that what I am? A career risk? Her voice was quiet, dangerous. You know that's not true. I stopped pacing, facing her. But this research could change lives. We're so close to a breakthrough. A knock at the door made us jump apart. Tom, the janitor, pushed his cart past, eyeing us suspiciously. "Meet me at my place later?" Stephanie whispered once he'd gone. "We need to figure this out." The drive to her apartment gave me time to think. The whispers would only get worse. Eventually, someone would file a formal complaint. But the thought of losing her, of watching her work with another research team. She opened the door before I could knock, pulling me inside. Her lips found mine immediately, desperate and demanding. "I can't lose this project," I breathed between kisses. "But I can't lose you either." "Then we find a way." She led me to her couch. "There must be a solution. We're scientists. Problem solving is what we do." We spent hours discussing options, possibilities, contingency plans. Keep things quiet until the research concluded? Request a departmental transfer? Look for positions at different institutions? "Whatever we decide," Stephanie said finally, her head on my shoulder. "We decide together." The next morning, we arrived at the lab separately, maintained professional distance, played our parts perfectly. But something had shifted. The secrecy that had felt exciting now felt suffocating. During lunch, in our usual courtyard spot, a group of researchers walked past, their whispers carrying on the breeze. Stephanie's hand found mine under the table, a silent act of defiance. "Let them talk," she murmured, fingers intertwining with mine. I squeezed her hand, remembering her words from last night. We'd find a way, we had to. Because some discoveries are worth any price, and some experiments can't be contained by laboratory protocols. The afternoon sun filtered through the courtyard trees, casting dappled shadows across our joined hands. In that moment, I realized something. Science was about pushing boundaries, challenging accepted theories, finding new ways forward. Maybe it was time to apply those principles beyond the lab. Spring storms in Moreno Valley could turn violent without warning. The afternoon sky darkened to an ominous purple as Stephanie and I rushed to finish developing our latest batch of photographs in her shop's darkroom. "These cellular microscopy shots are incredible," she said, hanging another print to dry. "The regeneration patterns almost look like abstract art." Thunder crashed overhead, making the old building shudder. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged us into total darkness. Red safety lights cast an eerie glow across Stephanie's face. "Perfect timing," she muttered. "The backup generator should kick in." It didn't. We were trapped in the darkroom, surrounded by half-developed photographs and the sharp scent of chemicals. Lightning illuminated the small space through the tiny ventilation window. "We can't leave until these finish developing," Stephanie said, her hand finding mine in the darkness. "The whole batch would be ruined." The storm raged outside as we worked by the dim red light, passing prints between us like a well-rehearsed dance. Our fingers brushed with each exchange, sending sparks through the humid air. "Remember the first time we developed photos together?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "You were teaching me about timing." I smiled at the memory. "How every second counts. You were such a perfectionist." Her laugh was low, intimate, treating it like a lab experiment. Another crack of thunder, closer this time. The rain drummed against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around us. In the red-tinted darkness, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "I've never shown anyone my darkroom process before," she admitted, moving closer. It felt too personal. Like sharing a secret. I could feel the heat of her body now, smell her perfume mixing with the chemical scents. Like sharing a part of myself. Her fingers traced patterns on my arm. "You're the first person who understood both sides of me, the scientist and the artist." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face inches from mine. Her eyes were dark with something more than shadow, her lips slightly parted. The air between us felt charged, electric. "Stephanie," I breathed, but she was already closing the distance. Her kiss tasted of passion and possibility. My back pressed against the development table as her hands tangled in my hair. The storm's rhythm seemed to match our heartbeats as we made love among the hanging photographs, red light painting patterns across bare skin. Chemical-stained fingers traced delicate equations across shoulders and spines. Scientific precision gave way to artistic passion. We mapped new territories with hands and lips, discovering reactions more profound than any laboratory experiment. Hours passed, marked only by thunder and sighs. When the power finally returned, we barely noticed. The developed photographs captured more than cellular structures. They held the essence of transformation, of boundaries dissolving, of two distinct worlds merging into something new and beautiful. Later, as we lay tangled together on the darkroom floor, Stephanie traced the curve of my shoulder. "You know what the best part of photography is?" "What's that?" I asked, still catching my breath. "Capturing moments that change everything." She kissed my temple softly. "Like this one." The storm gradually subsided, leaving behind a fresh-washed world and a collection of perfectly developed photographs. But the most significant development had nothing to do with silver nitrate or chemical baths. We emerged from the darkroom different people than when we entered. Like a photograph slowly revealing itself in developer fluid, something permanent had been fixed between us, an image that would last far beyond the storm's passing. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line glowing on my screen: Research Fellowship Opportunity, Stanford University. My heart raced as I read through the details. A 2-year position leading my own cellular regeneration research team. "Dr. Brown?" Stephanie's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "The latest test results are ready." I minimized the email quickly, but not fast enough. She'd seen it, I could tell by the way her shoulders tensed. "Stanford?" She kept her voice neutral, professional. We were in the lab after all. "That's quite an opportunity." "Just preliminary," I said. But we both knew I was deflecting. "Let's look at those results." The rest of the day passed in a haze of awkward silences and careful distance. That evening, as we were packing up, another email arrived, this one for Stephanie. "The Modern Light Gallery wants to feature my work." Her voice wavered slightly. "A 6-month showcase in New York." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Success was pulling us in opposite directions, just when we'd finally found our rhythm. "We should celebrate," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "Dinner at my place?" The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken words. I watched Stephanie in the passenger seat, her profile illuminated by passing streetlights, wondering how something so right could feel so complicated. "When would you leave?" she asked finally, as I uncorked the wine. "The fellowship starts in September. 3 months away. If I accept." "When would you leave?" I echoed back. "July. Even sooner. If I accept." We moved to the couch, wine forgotten. The city lights twinkled beyond my windows, reminding me of our first dinner together, when everything seemed simpler. "I can't ask you to give up Stanford," Stephanie said softly. "It's your dream. And I can't ask you to pass on New York." I took her hand, tracing the familiar lines of her palm. "Your work deserves to be seen." "Long distance?" The words hung in the air between us. 3,000 miles. I'd already calculated it. Different time zones, different lives, different dreams. She pulled me closer, until my head rested on her shoulder. When did success start feeling like failure? We spent the night talking through possibilities, each one more improbable than the last. I could delay the fellowship. She could find a gallery in California. We could both say no, stay in our comfortable bubble at Moreno Valley Institute. "Remember what you told me about scientific breakthroughs?" Stephanie asked as dawn began to break. "How sometimes you have to destroy something to create something better." "Cellular degradation before regeneration," I murmured. "Breaking down to build up. Maybe that's us." She kissed my temple softly. "Maybe we need to break apart to find our way back stronger." The next week passed in a blur of grant proposals and gallery preparations. We threw ourselves into work, as if professional success could fill the growing void between us. "I submitted my response," Stephanie told me one evening in the lab. "To the gallery." I nodded, not trusting my voice. My own acceptance email to Stanford sat in my drafts folder, waiting. "Whatever happens," she said, her hand finding mine under the microscope, "these months have been worth it." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and stared at the draft email. The cursor blinked accusingly, waiting for my decision. Success had always been my North Star, the thing that drove me forward. But now, watching the city lights blur through unexpected tears, I wondered if I'd been following the wrong constellation all along. The gallery hummed with anticipation, as the last photographs were hung. Our shared moments captured in silver and light, microscopic worlds beside intimate portraits, science and art intertwined on stark white walls. Nervous? I asked, watching Stephanie adjust a frame for the 10th time. Terrified. She stepped back, examining the angle. This isn't just my work anymore, it's our story. The exhibition, titled Through Different Lenses, showcased our journey. Cellular photographs merged with candid moments, the lab at midnight, shadows in the darkroom, quiet mornings in the courtyard. Each image told a piece of our tale. They're going to love it, I assured her, resisting the urge to reach for her hand. The gallery staff bustled around us, preparing for opening night. Dr. Morrison confirmed he's coming. Stephanie smoothed her dress anxiously. The whole department, actually. Let them come. I smiled, remembering our careful secrets. No more hiding? The gallery filled quickly that evening. Colleagues mingled with art critics. Scientists discussed composition with photographers. Our worlds colliding in ways I never imagined possible. These cellular structures are extraordinary, Dr. Morrison mused, studying a large print. The artistic interpretation adds a whole new dimension to the research. That's what we hope to show, Stephanie explained, her confidence growing. How science and art can illuminate each other. I watched her work the room, proud of how she handled each question, every critique. She'd arranged the exhibition chronologically, from our first meeting at the camera shop to our latest experiments. The final wall remained empty, waiting for future moments. This is quite remarkable, Dr. Brown. The dean's voice startled me. Not what I expected from our cellular biology department. Sometimes the best discoveries happen outside our comfort zones, I replied, thinking of all the boundaries we'd crossed. As the evening progressed, the crowd thinned until only a few guests remained. Stephanie found me by the window, where city lights competed with gallery spotlights. Dance with me? She whispered, holding out her hand. There's no music. Since when has that stopped us? We swayed together in the quiet gallery, surrounded by our documented love story. Her head found my shoulder, fitting perfectly as always. Remember how scared we were, she murmured, of what people would think? Now look at us. I gestured to the walls, putting it all on display. The last guests left, leaving us alone among the photographs. Moonlight streamed through the skylights, casting silver patterns across the floor. Everything felt possible in that moment. Stephanie led me to the empty wall, her eyes bright with mystery. I saved this space for something special. She unveiled a final photograph, us in the darkroom during the storm, caught in a moment of pure connection. The red safety light painted everything in shades of passion and promise. How did you... Timer on the camera, she smiled. Some moments deserve to be preserved. We made love there in the moonlit gallery, surrounded by the evidence of our journey. Each photograph witnessed our passion, our defiance of conventional boundaries. The empty wall would hold our future memories. Dawn found us curled together on the gallery floor, the first hints of sunrise painting new colors across our photographs. The exhibition would open to the public today, our private world exposed to curious eyes. No regrets? I asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Only if we'd chosen differently. She kissed me softly, tasting of new beginnings. Some experiments are worth any risk. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating our story on the walls. We'd found a way to merge our worlds, to make art from science and science from art. Sometimes the most beautiful results come from the most unexpected combinations. The morning sun streamed through the windows of our new shared lab space, illuminating the unique fusion we'd created. Microscopes sat beside vintage cameras, scientific papers mingled with photography portfolios, and cellular images decorated the walls alongside artistic prints. Ready to present our joint research art project? Stephanie adjusted the display screen, her wedding ring catching the light. We'd moved into the apartment above her camera shop 6 months ago, transforming the space into our home and creative headquarters. The board's never seen anything like this before. I checked the presentation slides one last time. Our breakthrough in cellular imaging had come from an unexpected place. Artistic visualization techniques applied to microscopic photography. That's what makes it revolutionary. She wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, breaking down barriers between disciplines. The project had started as a compromise, a way to merge our passions when choosing between them seemed impossible. Instead of Stanford or New York, we'd proposed something entirely new to Moreno Valley Institute, a cross-disciplinary research initiative, combining scientific imaging with fine art photography. Remember when we thought we had to choose? I turned in her arms, touching my forehead to hers. Science or art, career or love. We chose both, she smiled, running her thumb over my matching ring. Always both. The presentation to the board exceeded our wildest expectations. Our innovative imaging techniques had revealed new patterns in cellular regeneration, while the artistic approach made the science accessible to a broader audience. The funding was approved unanimously. That evening, we celebrated on the shop's rooftop garden. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that reminded me of darkroom chemicals, of first kisses and stormlit confessions. "I have something for you," Stephanie said, disappearing downstairs. She returned with a familiar object, the Rolleiflex that had brought us together. "Look through the viewfinder," she whispered, positioning the camera in my hands. Through the ground glass, I saw our future laid out like a perfectly composed photograph. Our shared lab, our artistic ventures, our life together. And there, tied to the camera's strap, a small note. "Marry me again?" "We're already married," I laughed, tears blurring my vision. "I want to do it every year," she said softly. "To celebrate choosing us, choosing both, choosing everything." I kissed her under the fading sky, tasting promise and possibility. The camera between us captured the moment in its twin lenses, a perfect metaphor for our dual vision, our shared perspective. Below, the vintage camera shop's bells chimed as the last customer left. Above, stars began to appear, as numerous as the cells we studied, as infinite as the art we created together. "Yes," I whispered against her lips. "Every year, every day, always yes." Life isn't about choosing between passions, I'd learned. It's about finding someone who helps you pursue them all, who sees through both lenses of your soul. Sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries happen when you stop trying to separate the scientist from the artist, the professional from the personal, the logic from the love. Through the Rolleiflex's viewfinder, our world was perfectly framed, a composition of light and shadow, science and art, two women who refused to choose between their dreams. We'd created something entirely new, a love story written in silver nitrate and cellular structures, in darkroom chemicals and laboratory breakthroughs. Some experiments change everything. Some photographs capture forever. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find both in the same moment, through the same lens, with the same person by your side. The end.